Well, it's a combination of things. Just to lay it out simply, kids are sinful. I have great-grandchildren, and by the time they're 3 or 4, their sin nature is starting to be manifest.
Wait, even in your grandchildren?
Even in my...
Okay.
Well, so kids are sinful. Then you add to that the sins of the fathers are visited on the generations, the 3rd and the 4th generation. What does that mean? Simply means that the sinful characteristics of a given generation pass on to the subsequent generations. So that it's kids who basically have a sin nature to start with, and they have an inherited sin culture that they have to navigate and deal with. That ought to be enough. But this culture has taken it a step further, and they are now targeting children. The homosexuals say, we're coming after your kids. They're not trying to protect them. They're targeting them in the schools. They're targeting them through the media. Disney and companies like that develop child entertainment are targeting children for really what amounts to moral and spiritual destruction. So this is a war on the children. I was thinking about another part of it the other day. I was reading a book, interesting book called A Profession Without Reason. It's a book that shows basically, this is pretty shocking to some of you, that psychiatry and psychology is finally admitting the noble lies that they've been telling for the last 100 years. And the major noble lie is there is such a thing as mental illness. Now, this isn't new. You have Thomas Szasz back in the 1950s writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, on the myth of mental illness. There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies. To basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. So the book deals with the ways in which children are being assaulted, and they're formidable because they're done by media, and they're in the hand of every kid through the cell phone. So the church has got to step up. We started a campaign called Grace for the Children. If you want to strengthen the church, and I know it's true here, if you want to strengthen the church, minister to the children. Let the parents know you're going to work to protect the children, which is the parents' greatest concern. So I wrote the book along those lines. I was telling the guys earlier that several Christian publishers passed on it, they wouldn't publish it, which shows you how woke even Christian publishing has become.
It was about a week or so ago that I was in a panel discussion, and it was being videoed, and the question came up about mental illness. And I made the comment, there's no such thing as mental illness. And I was told within a matter of a few hours that blew up the internet. And one of the headlines was, Doctor and woman preacher take issue with John MacArthur. I don't know about the doctor, but I'm happy to take issue with a woman preacher. That's fine. But there were lots of other people who weighed in on what a horrendous thing I had just said. And I know it's been circulating out there because people have been asking me about it. An interesting phone call came in. I just heard it this morning from a person who said, I represent the leading psychologist in this country. And also, we manage the largest facility for juveniles who commit adult crimes. And I'm calling the church to let Pastor MacArthur know that everything he said is exactly true. Now, you don't know if I made that up or not. You have to trust me. But I was pretty surprised. And they went on to say, if he wants to write a book, we'll supply all the data. There's no such thing as mental illness. That is not a new concept. That goes back to the 1950s. Thomas Saz, a psychiatrist who wrote the book, The Myth of Mental Illness. And that myth has been around for a long time. And it's been just in the last few years that data has come in, and people in the psychiatric and psychological world have admitted that they have been telling noble lies for decades and decades and decades, identifying supposedly mental illness as a way to explain people's odd behavior, difficult behavior. But I'm not saying this. I'm not saying there's no brain disease. There is. But that's different. That's pathological. That can be objectively identified. Now, I don't want to become clinical here, but I just will say enough to let you see the difference. If you're talking about brain disease, you're talking about several categories. The first would be an infection in the brain. That could be meningitis, which is inflammation of the lining of the brain, or it could be encephalitis, which is the inflammation of the actual brain tissue. Those can be discerned, those can be seen, those can be understood, they can be objectively identified. A second category next to infections that fits into the zone of brain disease would be seizures. Seizures because something is wrong, like maybe epilepsy or some other form of seizure. Something is wrong with the electrical system. The current system is misfiring. The third possibility of real brain disease is tumors and masses. We all know about that. They can be discerned. They can be seen in a CAT scan or in an MRI, sometimes in an X-ray, or certainly in surgical procedure. And the fourth sort of large category of brain disease would be trauma, like a concussion or some accident or some injury to the brain that takes a toll on the brain's ability to function because part of the brain is disconnected or taken into disuse. The birth defects could lead to that as well. But all of that can be understood and seen by objective testing. That is not the case with mental illness. Mental illness is a term that is really not identifiable by any objective means. You can't see it in an MRI or an X-ray or a CAT scan or surgery. You can do brain surgery and you're not going to see schizophrenia. So this is a misnomer. And I went on to say in that panel discussion, there's no such thing as OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. There's no such thing as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's no such thing as bipolar disorder, where you're low and high, and somehow this is something that's embedded in the brain. There's no such thing as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is not to say that people don't have problems. It is to say they have problems, but they're not connected to some mental deficiency. Even schizophrenia, which is a pretty severe word, and it means, generally speaking, somebody who loses the ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. And reading about that a little bit this week, I read that a particular article that I was looking at from a high level said, schizophrenia is permanent. You have it your entire life. Now, this is pretty much typical of the other disorders as well. If this is something that your brain is doing to you, then you're not responsible for it. You understand that? That's very important to understand. Now, am I saying that there's no such thing as obsessive compulsive behavior? No. There is obsessive compulsive behavior. Am I saying there's no such thing as attention deficit hyperactivity? No. There is such a thing. I possessed it as a kid. I am a living illustration. You can recover. You can recover, and you can recover without medication. There were two things that every teacher I ever had said to my mother. Johnny doesn't pay attention, and he never sits still. That is attention deficit hyperactivity. That had nothing to do with something permanent existing in the fog of my brain. I'm not saying there's no such thing as post-traumatic stress. There is post-traumatic stress. You go to a battle, you lose the three guys around you, you walk away, you got survivor guilt, you've got profound grief because your friends you were so deeply invested in battling for survival. You've got deep pain, you hurt, you're suffering, you're grieving. That's a very real thing. Is it a mental disorder? No, it's life. It's life. This is life. People have grief. Life is very difficult. It's hard. It's hard. The United States government has a particular website talking about these mental health issues. And my favorite line is a banner that's across the website. It says this: mental disorders are not caused by character flaws. Oh, what are they caused by? If they're not caused by character flaws, that's a dead giveaway. These kinds of things we're talking about are the result of people's inability to cope with life. Life is hard. Life is challenging. Life is disappointing. There's lots of disillusion. There's lots of pain, lots of suffering, lots of abuse. We all understand that. How you deal with that is critical if you're going to live out your life. You've got to figure out how to live life. If somebody says to you, it's not your problem, it has nothing to do with the flaw in your character, this is something that you are born with, and it's a disorder, and you're going to have it all your life, and since it's there and you can't really do anything to eliminate it, we're going to put you on these drugs. And they roll out 15 different psychotropic drugs to mask the reality that you can't deal with life and create more problems so that you eventually can wind up on Skid Row under a bridge living in half a tent. This is being done to children, and it's criminal. It's criminal. Now, I understand we have a generation of people who can't cope with life. I understand why. Absent fathers, devastated marriages, absent mothers, no family support, high rate of divorce, abuse, disappointment, lack of love, all kinds of things. And particularly the breakdown of the family, because the family is where you learn how to live life. It's where you watch people suffer and handle it. It's where, if you can't get it from your mom and dad, you find your way to grandma's house because she knows, and you lean on her wisdom. But where you have a society that don't have those kinds of resources, don't have those families to turn to, you're going to have more dysfunctional people. I was thinking about it the other day as I was watching these ridiculous university students rioting and burning things down. And I was waiting for a psychiatrist to come on television and say, oh, wait a minute, you have to understand. They have rebellion, hostility, violence, hate disorder. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. It's not a character flaw. This is a disorder. Why don't they say that? I mean, it's one thing to irritate a teacher, something else to burn the school down. Right? Why do you label somebody who irritates a teacher because he can't pay attention, and you don't have a category for somebody who burns the school down? I mean, if you're going to blame everything on some mental disorder, you might as well blame the really serious things on that. But there's so much fraud in all of this. I understand. Life is hard. Life is tough. And you need help. We all need help. We needed our moms when we were young. You know, when we were little kids, you had children. When your 3-year-old mouths off and talks back to you and takes a whack at mom, you don't say, he's got a MW disorder, a mom whacking disorder. What? If the kid who can't keep his attention has a disorder, what about the kid who's bored stiff and sits in the corner and never says anything? Is that a disorder? And what's a disorder and what isn't a disorder? It's all about mechanisms to learn the skill of living life. There was a time when people turned to pastors and the church and religion. And now the new religion is psychology and psychiatry. You turn to them, and they don't have any answer because they don't even understand that the problem is not physiological. It's not a disease. They don't even understand that. And when they give those drugs to people, those drugs are not like insulin. Insulin is desired to deal with diabetes. It does so directly. When you take drugs for whatever your disorder is, that doesn't attack the disorder. That attacks you and creates another disorder. The inability to cope with life now because you're living in some kind of altered state. It's horrendous what's happening to children whose lives are, in some cases, destroyed, and very often suicidal tendencies overwhelm them and they actually take their own lives. All the drugs don't help people face life. Life is hard. You have to have answers. I understand fear, a lot of things to be afraid of. A lot. I understand depression. You can get tired of being mistreated, misjudged, unloved. That can get old. You can be tired of being disillusioned, disappointed. You can be weary of the grief that you have to bear or the struggle of caring for others who don't care for you. There's plenty of abuse out there, plenty of anger. That is life. The question is, how do you handle that? By taking some drug that alters your state of consciousness and does nothing for your supposed disorder, which is some life sentence? So I would say, I think it's important for people who have these kinds of problems, and we all do, to talk to somebody else, right? We need help. We need moms and dads and brothers and sisters and grandmas and grandpas and friends and mentors and teachers and counselors and everybody who can kind of teach us how to develop skills to live life. And the young generation coming along should expect the older generation to teach them that. We've got a young generation that obviously haven't been taught anything about life. They're just violent and angry. So what is the solution? The solution is to recognize that you don't have a mental illness. You have a problem with, are you ready for this? Here's a word my mother said to me very often: self-control. Get a grip on your life. To survive, you have to find some skills for dealing with the things that go wrong. So how do you do that? Well, you could go to a counselor, and you might be helped by somebody who could teach you skills about how to cope with life. But ultimately, no earthly counselor, not even the best, not even your parents, can deliver you from the most profound fear, which you have all your life long. And the Bible says it's the fear of what? Death. That's what I want to know. Who can deliver me from the fear of death? That's the issue. No counselor, no drug. There is one who can. All of that to say, open your Bible to John 13.